Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the maiden voyage of Soya and Baila's world tonight. As you can see, we have added Baila because we have a very special program. We have emerged, as you can hear, our show has evolved. Soya's world has evolved from old-fashioned radio into a multi-platform podcast and has merged with the renowned Definitive Rap, hosted by our dear friend and well-known media personality, Baila Sebro. So I'm Bumi. Here's your hostess, Baila, to say hello. Baila.
Hi, Bumi. Hi, everybody.
It's great to be with you, and it's great to have this maiden voyage. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, your radio hostess, Hoya. Soya.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Okay, we hope we're going to give you as entertaining a program as Baila has always done with her Definitive Rap, and as Soya has always done with Soya's World. So we're Soya and Baila's World. Anyway, just for a little information, it is now nearly 8.5 months since the war in Israel began on October 7th, 2023. The battle of good against evil continues. Our show tonight, by the way, is sponsored by Velocity Capital Group. It's our primary sponsor. If you happen to own a small business or a media-sized business and you need money for any reason whatsoever, be it payments, inventory, expansion of your business, or maybe you need to even save your business, for all of your business needs, Velocity Capital Group is the place to go. Now, Velocity Capital Group gives you the ability to get financed and get money that you need for your business. You can be approved within exactly 24 hours, a 24-hour turnaround, which means you don't have to go through the bank and wait for the bank, which can take weeks until you get approval. And this can be done 1, 2, 3, literally up to $1 million. And so if you need to, the place to call is 833 VCG, as in Velocity Capital Group Fund. Again, 833 VCG Fund. That's the phone number. And you can also Google Velocity Capital Group. Their regular email address is info@velocity, VELOCITY, CG, as in capital group.com. Soya?
When your bank says no, Velocity says yes.
Okay. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, before we introduce, we have a very special program. We're going to have a very special guest, a renowned and celebrated author, as well as a lecturer and a sociologist. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her shortly. But first, I'm going to give both Baila and Soya an opportunity to give whatever shout outs they like, and like to let everybody know that you can get in touch with us, either one of us at any time, to do shout outs and to get shout outs, and we'd be happy to do so. Soya, you want to start? Here's your list of regular shout outs that you've done on the radio every week.
Dove and Shani Hikins,
right,
sending you our love.
As always.
Of course, Assemblyman Lester Chang, Assemblyman Simcha Eichenstein and his wonderful staff, my favorite councilwoman, Ina Vernikov, Bumi's favorite councilman, Kalman Yeager, who's not going to be
he's going to be an assemblyman
He's
soon,
going to be an assemblyman soon.
His term as a council expires.
Inspector Richie Taylor, and of course, 66 Precinct Community Liaison and Affairs Officer
Baila, that's our precinct,
Wing
66.
Chen, James Jamin, and Detective Michael Ramau. And also the two new captains of the 66 precinct. Well, they're not so new anymore.
Not so new anymore. Our
Ken
captains.
Araki and Christian Cheese. And of course, a huge shout out to the entire NYPD, FDNY, DSNY, and every other community
and city
civil service
entity that serves
our community. Thank you.
Our communities, because we are in the city and we are outside the city. Baila, you're out in Long Island, right?
That's right.
So we have spread across now. We're beyond just the New York City borders. We're in Long Island. We're all over the place, actually.
Baila, do you have anyone special?
Baila, who would you like to give a shout out to?
I would like to give a shout out to our audience for tuning in And
Wow, she's really
different in
buttering
colors.
them up.
But also, I would like to give a shout out to the hostages who are in Gaza. And we love you. And we want you to come home. And a major shout out also to the families of the hostages. We are with you. We feel your pain. And we can't wait until you welcome your loved ones home safe and sound.
Amen.
I'll drink to that, Bela. Bela, on that note, I'm going to do our word of the day, if that's okay with you. Bela, may I begin with the word of the day?
Oh,
And
please.
that's going to lead us into tonight's very special segment. Tonight's word of the day is anti-Semitism. Now, I'm going to give you two definitions, ladies and gentlemen. The general dictionary definition to anti-Semitism is, quote, hostility to, prejudice towards, or discrimination against Jews. Then there is the definition, which is the official going definition by the IHRA, which is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. That definition is as follows, quote, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. On that note, we're going to bring our special guest tonight. Her name is Dr. Amy Neustein. Amy is a sociologist who has authored and edited 16, that's right, I said 16, 1-6, ladies and gentlemen, academic books with leading publishing houses. She edits 3 science and technology book series for De Gruyster and Springer, respectively, and that she does as we speak. Her books have been cited so far and wide as in the New York Times, Newsweek magazine, the Chronicles of Higher Education, and reviewed in the New York Law Journal, Contemporary Sociology, Tablet magazine, and a host of other venues. She has contributed opinion columns to Israel National News, Arutz Sheva, the Jerusalem Post, The Hill, Washington Jewish Week, City Journal, Manhattan Institute, Newsweek, and a host of other publications. She was recently profiled in a lengthy feature story appearing in the April issue of Jewish Life. She resides in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to bring you Dr. Amy Neustein. Dr. Amy Neustein. Dr. Neustein, are you with us?
Yes, I certainly am.
Well, as you know, I just read off, anti-Semitism, Dr. Neustein, is the big question. Has it existed in the past? And I think we all know the answer to that. The question, I mean, primarily is we are living now in the greatest country in the history of man, the United States of America, and it is the year 2024. Is what we see, anti-Semitism, real or is it not real? Is it imagined? Has it always been there? Has it sort of lied dormant under the surface? Because in my view, and I think in most people's view, it has erupted like a volcano that has just literally exploded with lava all over the place. And it is very scary, you know, everything that we're seeing out there. What do you think? Where do we begin, Dr. Neustein?
Well, anti-Semitism has been around since the beginning of time. It has reemerged in the wake of October 7th, but it was really incrementally increasing since about 2016, 2017. There's been a movement in the universities to bring in anti-Israel lecturers. There's been a movement in the universities, as we well know, for almost 2 decades to boycott and divest and sanction.
Dr. Neustein, when you say incrementally increasing, okay,
Yes.
from 2016,
Right.
you mean as something, it's not a novelty. You mean it's something that was, again, hidden underneath the surface and
Correct.
surfacing.
Correct. Now, I want to explain something.
Yeah, I'd like to know what
Let me just
precipitated
say,
that.
sociologically, the way anti-Semitism is gauged, the way it's measured, is by surveying of a large cohort of individuals that are demographically representative, basically, or a demographic mixture, so that you don't have any skewed findings. Now, to put together the cohort and then to ask a number of survey questions to see about their perceptions and whether they buy into the very common anti-Semitic tropes that Jews are pushy, that Jews are clannish, that Jews amass power, that Jews leverage their power in the government, to analyze whether they buy into those tropes, that takes time, because you have to put together a valid sample size, a large enough cohort that you're not skewed in one direction versus the other. So what's happening since October 7, we won't have the hard stats on the percentage of increase of anti-Semitism till about 2 years from now, because that's how long it takes to do a survey of the population and to analyze the results of that survey. So we have
Dr. Neustein,
we have qualitative data, we have narratives.
okay.
Narratives are terribly alarming.
Mm-hmm.
And the narratives point to the fact that when we start to do the sociological studies and we have a large enough database and we start to analyze it with sociological precision to make sure the methods are valid and reliable, in which wherein the results are reproducible under those in that setting, to make sure it's sociologically valid, we have to control the experiment, control for factors, as I mentioned, that would skew the results in one way versus another. You want accurate survey findings. So we will know, we'll have the hard stats in 2 years from now. What we have now is so hair-raising in terms of the narratives that we've seen on the campuses, in the streets, personal experiences that people have had, social media, etc., that I fear that once we do the larger study, the sociological studies 2 years down the road, we're going to see a tremendous uptick in anti-Semitism, because the narratives that we're seeing now, the qualitative data, augurs poorly for what we're going to see quantitatively 2 years down the road.
You know, what you're saying scares the hell out of me, but I want to ask you something, because I think this is something that I think most people wonder about, and it's talked about quite frequently. This spike in anti-Semitism, is this something comparable to what we saw or what people had seen in the 1930s in Germany, in Europe?
I think it's worse.
Well, the thing is this, we don't know. It has, you know, a lot of people who have lived through the Holocaust, and they're the children of Holocaust survivors, they are very intuitive. And they use a lot of perceptual skills to try to understand what they're going through, what we're living through. And as soon as October 7 happened, my discussions with children of Holocaust survivors were alarming to me, because they felt convinced that this was a reprise of the 1930s, because they were using their intuition, their perceptual skills. And what I'm seeing is a lot of red flags that would indicate that we are going through something that could be, God forbid, as bad as, or have shades of, I should say, shades of what we endured in the 1930s. There are indications, the subway incidents, raise your hand if you're a Zionist. It will give you a last chance to raise your hand. Otherwise. That was a reprise of wearing the Jewish star on one's arm in the 1930s. There's a lot of qualitative data and narratives that are coming out in different pockets of the world. Obviously, not just the United States. And France has had an uptick, and other countries likewise. In South Africa, for example, I think they're down to something, if my memory is correct, I think they've lost something like maybe 35 to 40% of their Jewish population has already migrated, and that started in from 2016 to present. So that was pre-October 7th.
Wow.
So a lot of enclaves, Jewish enclaves throughout the world are feeling that this is chas v'sholem, a reprise of what they saw in the 30s. And that's why there's such a movement, Never Again is Now, and Stand with Israel. There's such urgency now to mobilize the community because it portends, the signs that we're seeing portend that, God forbid, we could be rolling back to an era where things were just so massively, catastrophically out of control. And then, of course, you have to look at the economy. In the 1930s, the economy was tanking in Europe. And that was one of the key factors precipitating massive anti-Semitism. And aren't we seeing that here? The problems with the economy, the 1% versus the rest of the population, people having 2.5 to 3 jobs. When people are worn down physically, financially, and emotionally, they are unfortunately vulnerable to any kind of trope you put in front of them, because to them it's an elixir. It's a way to extricate themselves from their dire circumstances and deflect all of their anger toward their own condition, deflected onto someone else. They scapegoat. They want to have someone to blame. And unfortunately, the Jewish nation has borne the brunt of this for thousands of years.
Dr. Neustein,
Yes.
I want to take a look back at
Mhm.
anti-Semitism, and I want to know whether it existed in the United States in earlier times. But before we get to that, I'd like to make some sort of a contrast, although the contrast now under the Biden administration doesn't seem to be as strong as it once was. In Nazi Germany, or in the 1930s, the anti-Semitism was government-sponsored anti-Semitism, and government-led and directed anti-Semitism. Here in the United States, I don't believe there is such a thing, although I am concerned with a lot of the leftists and a lot of what's going on within the Biden administration as well. But again, it's not government-sponsored. Is the anti-Semitism primarily, or whatever has that it has spiked so much and it has surfaced with such an unbelievable force, is that related now to October 7th, and are the Muslims behind it primarily, or is there something more?
Well, I think that's sort of reduction if there's something more. And to answer your question about government-sponsored anti-Semitism, if RFK Jr. would get into office, let's just say we pretend we're Philip Roth for a minute, plot against America, right? Instead of Lindbergh getting in, you have RFK Jr. getting in. He has been spouting the most vile anti-Semitic tropes, claiming that the Jews were responsible for COVID, that the Jews manufactured COVID in order to destroy the rest of the world. So we could be a hair's breadth away from government-sponsored anti-Semitism if the wrong person gets into office.
So
If you have
we
someone
need
from the
President
squad,
Trump.
if someone from the squad should just meteorically rise to power politically, and they have control over the day-to-day functioning of the country, then you can have government-sponsored anti-Semitism. I'm petrified that someone like Kennedy could cause something like this, RFK Jr., because of the tropes, the anti-Semitic tropes, and he believes his own delusions, and he has followers. So we at present, we don't have a government-sponsored anti-Semitism, but we have individuals in office who, if they rose to power, then we would have a government-sponsored anti-Semitism.
So it really is that dangerous.
Yes, it is that dangerous. It is. And to answer your other question, it's been incrementally building over years. If you look at the Anti-Defamation League studies, comparing, let's say, 2016, 2017 with a study they did in 2019. and the ADL findings, and it was very thorough, meticulous study, and many Judaic studies scholars and sociologists were part of the study, and they saw an uptick in anti-Semitism, not as extreme as we've had post-October 7, but they did see it incrementally increasing. They saw an escalation of anti-Semitism, and that is happening because of so many different factors that are happening at once. The economic structure and the mobilization of the choir of anti-Israel voices that you see at the universities, all the pro-Palestinian groups and their affiliates, and then you bring in DEI, diversity,
exclusion, right?
Exactly,
Diversity, equity,
it's
inclusion,
diversity, equity, and
inclusion, right?
Inclusion, yes. So you bring it. The DEI agenda has really taken root at the universities, even at the academic publishing houses that are run by the universities. The authors, before they sign contracts to write academic books, are compelled, they're required, they're mandated to follow a DEI agenda. Professors have to fill out DEI questionnaires every single semester to show what they have done in their classroom, to show sensitivity to the to the formerly disenfranchised populations.
And this is all part of our woke civilization, basically, run amok.
Absolutely, yes. Exactly.
Baila wanted to say something. Baila, you wanted to, please.
Yes, hi. Amy, thank you so much for being here with us. This is Baila Seabrow. First off, you know, I've read the article about your great-grandfather's murder.
Yes.
So please accept my condolences on the brutal murder of your great-grandfather Yehoshua Hennick. People should never stop offering condolences. Though this happened in 1928, people should never stop offering condolences because the emotional wounds left behind of your great-grandfather's death will never close. And they won't close because his anti-Semitic murderer was never brought to justice. And because every day that a Jew dies at the hands of an anti-Semite, the wound of Yehoshua's death gets even deeper. You quoted, Amy, you quoted in an article for Aish.com where you state that you fear complacency more than you fear anti-Semitism. And that is a problem that we saw back then. And that is what we are seeing today, complacency. A Jew is killed, and what do the anti-Semites say? He brought it on himself. In other words, the victim is made to look like the perpetrator. Mind-boggling, does not even begin to explain how nonsensical that is. And when a Jew defends himself, again, he's the perpetrator. So there's no winning in the mind of a Jew hater. Can you make sense of this?
It's completely irrational, completely irrational. You can't possibly make sense of this. And what bothers me, I have a category I call persons from Jewish backgrounds who are not passionate, who are complacent, and they say, oh, it's only one death here, one death there, it doesn't affect me. They go on with their lives. They've never been to Eretz Yisrael. If they were given a choice, they'd rather go to Paris than Israel, as young people, if they're given a choice. I call them diluted Jews. They've watered down Judaism to the point where they're not cognizant of the threat to our survival. They're not cognizant of how urgent it is to mobilize and to have achdus, to be harmonious and come together with one another, to build that consensus, to protect our nation. They're diluted Jews. And 50% of the Jewish population, we have, 13, 14 million Jews worldwide? That's pretty much, the sum total, 15 million.
And they don't understand. And what they don't understand is that October 7th, the Hamas terrorists didn't care if someone is Orthodox, non-Orthodox, or even Jewish. They killed and they took hostages as they pleased. So it's everybody's problem.
Right, and it even brought in foreign nationals.
It's every person's problem in the world.
Well,
Correct.
it's everybody's problem, Bela and Dr. Neustein, in as much as remember as I've been saying over the radio for the past year, at least since October 7th, is that we are currently in a civilizational battle. There is the Judeo-Christian heritage on one side, which represents light, love, and peace. There is the Muslim heritage on the other, which represents darkness, hatred, and violence. That is their ideology, the fundamental. That's who Muhammad was. And I pardon me if I offend any of our Muslim listeners. And we got flack for it, Bela, when we were on the radio. Soya got beaten up for it, not physically, but she took quite a bit of flack because we had a multi-diverse group of listeners. We had Muslims as well, in addition to Christian listeners.
But that's what the religion is.
That's the reality of who they are and what they are. So this is something that people have to realize and wake up to, that there's a little Satan that's the easier target, which are the Jews as far as they are concerned first, but then they're coming for the Christians as well. Global domination and a global caliphate is their ultimate goal.
Exactly. Well, October 7th, you had foreign nationals, people from the Philippines, people from Ireland got caught up in this. But I wanted to address about my grandfather.
Please tell us the story.
Yeah, please do. And also when you tell us the story, I was very curious because you started off the article saying that your family hushed your great grandfather's death. So if you can please, tell us a little bit about that and why your family hushed it up as well.
Okay. When I was first told about this gruesome, horrid murder when I believe I was about 8 or 9 years of age. I remember exactly where I was standing in my house in Brooklyn when I was told this, because it really affected me. I was a very sensitive child. I'm a writer, and words mean a lot to me, and I'm affected by things very much. And what struck me was that when my parents told me about it, it was done in such a matter-of-fact way, a placid way. In fact, they didn't seem to be enraged about the injustice. It was more like Yehoshua. They said Bubby's father. Bubby was my father's mother, so we called her Bubby, and I adored her. And I was told that my grandfather died of a brain tumor. That was before I was born. My Bubby was still, my grandmother was still living. Thank God, she lived into her 90s. And in that same breath, I was told that Bubby's father was shoved down an elevator shaft, Erev Shabbos, at Hennington Hall, this fabulous catering facility that he had started, where he had devoted 2 floors to Jewish charities and never charged them rent. He was an extraordinary person, a Talmud Chacham, and a very charitable man. And that Erev Shabbos, he had gotten into his outfit to go to shul. The shul was across the street, down the block. It was very nearby where the Hennington Hall was located. It was called Hennington Hall because his name was Hennig. His name was Yehoshua Hennig. And my mother told me, my father as well, that Erev Shabbos, an employee who was an anti-Semite, opened the elevator shaft. In those days, there was no requirement to lock the elevator shaft, and took Yehoshua, my great grandfather, shoved him down the elevator shaft to his death.
Oh
and the death certificate showed the impact of the fall. His spinal cord severed immediately, and the spine cracked because he went head first. If you, God forbid, walk into an elevator shaft and you don't know there's an elevator there and you have an accident, your legs become broken. So it goes the femur, and then the other bones, and then it hits the tailbone, and that's it. And you have to have your bones reset. But if you're thrust down an elevator shaft, it's always head first because you're pushed at a 90-degree angle. So the head is heavy and it hits the bottom of the elevator first, and the pressure from the impact snaps the spinal cord, and then you can't breathe. All the vital organs stop.
Dr. Neustein, what year again was this?
This was 1925, and the death certificate shows that the time of death was 8 o'clock, because this was Shabbos was late. It was in August, and he was going out to shul, and then there were a lot of onlookers, a lot of witnesses, because it was a bustling catering facility, and they also had services. They had davening at this Hennington Hall because it had a tremendous seating capacity. Place was filled with onlookers, and what happened was several of the witnesses came to my Yehoshua had remarried. His wife died in complications of childbirth. So my grandmother had a stepmother. They came to my grandmother's stepmother's home, and they had to break the news to her that her husband had been killed.
Ugh.
And they told her that he was an employee who was a little bit inebriated, slightly inebriated, and all steamed up against my great-grandfather. Was a very honorable, charitable man, a kind person. And the employee said, "You dirty Jew." And he opened the door and shoved him down the elevator shaft to his death.
So this was a gruesome anti-Semitic murder
Correct.
a century ago,
Correct.
right here at home in the United States, in New York
Correct.
City,
Correct.
with such a large number of Jewish people.
Right. And my grandfather languished for 11 days in the city mortuary. He was taken to Mount Sinai Hospital first. That's protocol. The hospital did the timestamp of death before he got to the hospital. So then the hospital did not perform the autopsy. It was done at the New York City morgue. My great Yehoshua's wife, who was my grandmother's stepmother, had to authorize the autopsy, or in some way it was a police matter by this point, but she was told about it. She had to go along with it. And because this was such a gruesome murder, they kept my great-grandfather at the New York City mortuary for 11 days before he was allowed to be interred in Mount Zion Cemetery. Before they would release his body for interment, they kept him there. And what happened to my grandmother's stepmother was that she became so ill from this that she was ravaged by diabetes. She was healthy before this. My great-grandfather was 62 years of age. She was about maybe 51, 52. She was not old. The anguish and the stress and the grief brought on diabetes, and she had a number of surgeries, and she would then eventually die I don't think she made it to 70. So she was taken down as well. And my grandmother suffered as a result of this such tormenting nightmares that my father was 13 at the time. It was shortly before his bar mitzvah, and he was devastated because he adored his grandfather. His grandfather is the one who used to encourage my father to become a Rav. He said, "You have the makings of a rabbi, you're a Talmid Chacham," and he used to learn with him. He was his study partner, Chavrusa. He inspired him. And to lose his grandfather right before his bar mitzvah, just within less than 3 months of the bar mitzvah, and the children at home, so my father was a middle child, so they were younger, and then the children a little older, they were told that when their mother has these blood-curdling nightmares, that to tap her and gently to wake her up from her bad dreams. So she was plagued all her days by this. And the murder happened shortly before the Yehoshua's a younger child that he had with the stepmother, with my grandmother's stepmother. He was supposed to get married, and the halacha is, the din is, you cannot, of course, plan a wedding after a death, but if the wedding is planned before the death, you're allowed to get married, and it's a mitzvah. You've got to get married after you get up from Shiva. So here's what's interesting. The wedding would naturally have been at Hennington Hall, which was this fabulous catering facility that had a victory party for Teddy Roosevelt. Louis Armstrong used to entertain there, and the unions used to come there because they had a lot of seating capacity, and there were shul services there. Instead of getting married at his father was dead, at his father's catering hall, he got married at the Commodore Hotel instead. So because Hennington Hall had this cloud over this, and it's almost ironic. I called Hennington Hall a few weeks ago, right after my articles came out, because Hennington Hall has been made into a landmark, and now it is a museum for multicultural art. And I spoke to the director, the museum director at Hennington Hall, and she said to me, "I feel I'm going to faint." And she said, "I'm going to tell you why." She said, "You're not going to believe this." She said, "Yesterday, we had an elevator repairman come to repair our elevator, and he didn't know anything about what happened to my great grandfather, but he mentioned to the director of the museum, he said, 'Let me tell you about this elevator. This elevator is historic. It's an extremely well-built elevator, and at the time this was installed, which is around the turn of the century, there were only 2 or 3 of this model in the city of New York to begin with. It was a very strong, well-built elevator, and the elevator repairman was just charmed by seeing something that was an antique and something that was such an unusual elevator. And then a day later, I tell the director what happened in that elevator. It was such just a hair-raising experience in terms of coincidences. And it showed that my great-grandfather really took his work seriously. He had a very good elevator installed. He put a lot of money into that, a lot of effort, not knowing that that elevator would be the cause of his death.
You know, Dr. Neustein, you just answered the first question that that we introduced the program with was, did anti-Semitism exist even in the past and even right here in the United States? And obviously the answer is a very a blazing capital YES, yes. And it has surfaced now again to such an extent, and it is so scary. What can be done about it? What do we have to do? How do we protect ourselves? Do we have to pick up and run and go, "Oh, everybody should run to Israel"? What now, Doctor?
Well, several things. We have to be alert, on high alert, and we have to be flexible. If we have to make Aliyah, we have to be prepared to do so. We have to have a flexible mindset. We cannot get caught in the 1930s where persons psychologically ignored and denied the signs, the warning signs, because it's too hard to extricate ourselves. On the contrary, we can't repeat that fatal mistake. We have to be flexible. We have to be on high alert, number one. Number two, we have to mobilize. We must form close unions with one another. We have to also try our best to bring in the diluted Jews. I hate to use a pejorative term like that, but those who are unenlightened, the benighted, the unenlightened, we need every soldier we can get at this point. So we have to bring them in. We have to educate them. We also obviously have to have a lot more education in the schools about not just the Holocaust, but about the Spanish Inquisition, about the Beis Hamikdash, about the pogroms in Europe, and about October 7th, because studies have shown that where there's more Holocaust education in the school system, for example, you have a lower percentage of anti-Semitism. So education is really the key. And that's where we have to keep pounding on the doors of our representatives in the Senate and in the House of Representatives to have them push to forward bills to increase funding for education in the school system, because with education and awareness, we can undo or we can, in a sense, control
Maybe instead
the fire
of the word,
from going out of control. We can contain it with education. We can contain the conflagration. It's an explosion. We can contain it by boosting the amount of dollars that go into the education of the public.
I think the word that you were looking for when you were about to say undo was subdue.
Right, we have to subdue it, not undo it. Right, we have to subdue it. We have to contain it. You're absolutely correct. We have to contain it, and we also need adult education too. It's not just the young minds. Anyone who has any kind of relations with a local library should go and speak to their library, to the head librarian, and say, "Let's have a lecture series at night on anti-Semitism." and offer to bring some book material and educate people in the adult community. It's true, it's the young minds that are most anti-Semitic now because they're impressionable and they've been exposed to toxic ideas at the universities. However, even among the middle-aged population and the older population, they need to be educated as well because they have influence over the young minds who are their grandchildren. So we don't want to just stop at one education, at one demographic group, want to educate every single demographic age group because these are family structures and the older people have an influence over the younger people and vice versa. So I think we have to be very broad in our approach to subdue the flaming anti-Semitism. We have to be broad and then you educate all groups, you use all different kinds of educational materials, and you have to take the position that it's nish dayenu, that it's not dayenu. There's that complacency where you say dayenu, it's enough. No, it's nish dayenu, it's not dayenu. It is never enough. With every breath we have to educate and subdue the anti-Semitism and to mobilize as a community. And we cannot be lulled into complacency where we say it's dayenu, it's enough, we've done what we could. No, we have to be on high alert and constantly working proactively to stem the tide of this pestilence.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Soya. You want to go
No,
ahead?
you mentioned if it's worse today. I happen to think that social media makes it mega worse, much, much worse. As far as being able to reach people nowadays that you weren't able to reach years ago. And you have the youth, you have everybody's on social media and different platforms, and just people putting up a picture, tropes, making, just every time just blaming it on the Jews.
Sawyer, you're right. But by the same token, that same social media, and Baila, you're very, very well, you know all about social media. You've been in there for so long. Baila, am I right or wrong? That same social media can be used to counter and as part of the educational.
Yeah, so anything can be used for good or for bad. It's up to the individual. But we were talking about education. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, and though there were Jews who fought back against the Nazis, most did not. And at that time, the world could not grasp how Germany, who was scientifically so progressive, could be so brutal. And today, we're seeing a repeat of history where anti-Semitic Ivy League students, for all intents and purposes, feel no different about the Jews than the Nazis did back then. But yet today, there is so much more progression than in years past. But where it relates to Jews, no, the hatred is still the same. In fact, it's now politically correct to hate Jews. It's the latest trend. Hate the Jews. As a sociologist, Dr. Neustein, Amy, as a sociologist, how do you make heads or tails out of that? Help us understand such a philosophy. So, are we dealing with brainwashing? How? We're not talking about illiterate people screaming anti-Semitic slurs. Brilliant students are doing that.
Yes. They're deflecting and they're scapegoating. And the Jews, unfortunately, the Jewish community is a target. It is a very receptive target to the scapegoating. And there are many reasons why we are scapegoated as Jews. Now, what's interesting is that in 1925, when my grandfather great-grandfather, was shoved to his death down the elevator shaft, Jews at that time did not have wealth. Jews at that time did not have political clout. Jews at that time the quotas in the school systems were so tight that they couldn't get an education, especially an advanced education, and not even at an Ivy League school. At any school, they couldn't get PhDs. They couldn't get into medical school. Right. So the Jews were held down. Notwithstanding that, the anti-Semitism was just as strong. So the point is that you can't say, oh, well, Jews are hated because they're successful. Jews are hated because they have prosperity, because during times when they didn't have prosperity, they were hated. They were hated in the 17th and 18th century in Europe. We had pogroms, so they were hated during that epoch when they were in a shtetl community. They were so poor they could only have meat on Shabbat, and because they couldn't afford it any other time.
Hated when rich, hated when poor. No matter
Yeah,
where we were
exactly.
socioeconomically, we were always hated.
Correct. So I have a theory as to why Jews are hated.
Please.
I have something that's novel I want to share, and I've never discussed this publicly before. And here's what I'm thinking, what I'm postulating in my mind.
What you're going to hear now, ladies and gentlemen, is the first time exclusively on Soya and Baila's World Tonight. Okay, please, Dr. Neustein.
Okay, so the hatred is not because the Jews are envied, because they have wealth and prosperity, because they were hated before they had wealth and prosperity. And I think that one of the reasons they're hated is this. The kind of person that indulges in hatred, in bigotry of any sort, is a person that feels dead inside, a sad, dejected person who doesn't feel self-worth, that there's no life inside of them. What does the Jew represent when you think about it? A Jew is full of life. Why? We're the chosen people. A Jew has an inextinguishable, you can't extinguish the neshama. A Jew is indefatigable, notwithstanding cycles of persecution for thousands of years. We rise above it and we contribute brain power to the world, and we're creative in everything we do. We're creative and we're passionate people. What does that mean? It means that we're alive. A dead person, a person whose neshama is dead, a person who's dead inside, has envy for the person who's alive. And the person who's alive doesn't have to be rich, doesn't have to be beautiful, they don't have to be powerful. Just by virtue of being alive, the dead person is envious of a live person. And I think that the Yiddish neshama is something that has a life force that I have never seen in other religions. It's something specific to our religion. It could be one of the reasons why we have survived, or it could be because we are chosen by Hashem to do the right thing, to be his people, to follow in his footsteps. It is because we were given the Torah, so we have a code of ethics to follow. Whatever it is, we're very much alive. And when you have that live flame inside of you, that incurs the wrath, enmity, hatred, and jealousy of a person who is dead inside, because you are the antithesis of what they are. And if you're the polar opposite, they have to hate you and they have to extinguish you, because there is a need for groups to have the whole world be just like them, because then they feel they have sovereignty over the earth. So everyone has to be like them. But a Jew is different than the rest of the population, because a Jew is alive. And the population that goes in for anti-Semitism is a population of dead people. And I'm not young anymore, and I've seen that. I lecture all over the world at academic institutions and at at industrial conferences, and I'm a people person. I really get a chance to talk to people. And those that relished in snide remarks toward me for being Jewish, I've had plenty in my lifetime. I noticed that personality type is dead inside. Whereas,
Dr. Neustein, that is a novel theory, but I think it's probably right on target. I think it's excellent. I think you should write about it. It is always, when you see who are the people are the ones that look for scapegoats and look to attack others, are the people that have some sort of incumbent psychological defect. They are, like you say, dead inside. They're missing something. They're angry at themselves and at the world. They feel as though the world has been unjust to them. And so those dead ones, in fact, that's exactly right on. I've never heard it expressed in such a way but it really is amazing. I think you're dead on target, Dr. Neustein. But on that note, as we begin to wind down, I would like to try to put things on this, Baila, if I may, on a little bit of a more positive, note as well, so that people don't walk away crying after they hear the program.
We want them to come back.
Yeah, of course. I think that we do have a lot of friends out there as well in the Christian community, especially in the evangelical communities. A lot of them are coming, if they don't know it yet, a lot of them, if they haven't recognized it till now, are coming around and beginning to recognize that the anti-Semitism is a sort of bitterness that's unfounded, and that we are in fact in a civilizational battle between good and evil. And there are a lot of officials and the public officials, both in the Senate, the House. We have a great Speaker of the House, Jim Johnson. We have some great officials here in our own country at home that do stand up and take a firm stance against
God bless
this kind
them.
of anti-Semitism. And I think that this is something to remember. And I think we have to obviously support them. And like you say, Dr. Neustein, join together.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yes. Thank God for all our friends out there. And I would like to believe that we have more friends than enemies.
I hope so, Baila. I did hear, Baila, that there's still the majority of people above the age of 30 are less anti-Semitic and more supportive of Israel and what has to be going on. They understand things, that the young ones are being brainwashed, that the older people are not being brainwashed to such an extent. Dr. Neustein, sociologically, am I correct?
You are correct. And I want to say something else, that those who are 30 and younger, they are impaired because they really came of age during the era of being polluted by social media. They're on their cell phone all the time. They're not in the library reading books. They're not as literate and as educated as those that are older. So we have a very impaired youth. Our young generation has been impaired on many fronts. So therefore, they're vulnerable to brainwashing because their brain has not been utilized. They've been immersed for the past 10, 20 years with the social media and the computer and everything and going online and all the kinds of things they're doing, and they're not really exposing themselves to literature. Yeah.
Right. Soya used to call that poisoning.
Right.
So I'm thinking we need to have another show to further and to discuss what we could do to educate the people and to spread the education to counter what the social media is doing, to actually maybe even use the social media on a higher level to educate people.
And that's where I give it to you two girls. It's Soya and Baila's world. Soya and Baila got to figure that out as to when and how, but absolutely.
Baila, are you wrapping it up?
Well,
Dr.
we will definitely continue this. I
Yes.
mean, we can go on and on. I mean, it's been such a pleasure, Dr. Neustein. Really,
Thank you.
It's a tremendous honor that you're giving us the time, and to our audience as well.
Yes, and we thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. We want you to stay safe, stay cool. I think we're having a heat wave coming up. So as we always say, stay safe, stay cool. Have a wonderful week, okay? And pray as always, and we'll see you next time. We hope that we're going to be a great success on this new Evolve podcast. Baila, it's been an honor to go on our maiden voyage with you. I'm sorry, excuse me. Our maiden voyage with you, Baila.
Good night.
You know what? I look forward to this long journey.
I do too.
And
okay.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Till next time. Good night.